The Garden Report is powered by PrizePicks, the exclusive daily fantasy partner of the CLNS Media Network.
Hey, Bobby Manning here. Welcome to a studio edition of The Garden Report. Thursday, Celtics Heat over. I'm in my PXG. Noa Dalzell's here in studio from Celtics Blog. We're going to get into what could happen in the next series, who the Celtics could play, as well as what happened on the 5 games that preceded this to open up the playoffs. Of course, we got to look at Kristaps Porzingis' absence in Game 5 as well and what life without him looks like. So we're going to hit on all of that here. And let's start with the Heat series, Noah. 5 games. I think that's what many expected, as well as a sweep. I know Jaylen Brown said last night, too, he wishes they got this done in 4. You had the slip-up in Game 2. You had some offensive issues in this series that we can get into. But overall, Celtics took care of business here. Did they prove anything, though, in this series?
I mean, I don't think you can really prove anything if you're the Celtics in the first round, but I will say I thought this was actually better than a sweep in the sense that they faced a roadblock. They had the Miami Heat go off for, a franchise record number of 3-pointers in Game 2, and then they really couldn't have responded better. I mean, 3 straight blowouts against a team that eliminated them last year. And I don't really care, honestly, that some of the players were missing. Like, obviously, that would have been a more competitive series if Jimmy Butler and Terry Rozier were there, but ultimately, like, the guys that have beaten them in the past, like Caleb Martin, like, he was there. Tyler Hero, got, people that have really stepped up before were essentially eliminated. Yeah, and so I thought it was a really impressive first round, and you saw a lot of good things. Some offensive struggles. I think a lot of players did not have their best series, but ultimately, I thought the defense and Derek White, and there was a lot of good things going on.
I think we were robbed of a great series, obviously, given that this went 5 without all those guys. And who knows, maybe Hawkins is in. We see a more competitive game last night because Highsmith gets into foul trouble. Mills and Wright can't do much out there. And Kevin Love, a disaster in this series.
He was tough, yeah.
Brutal again last night. They went right at him with Horford, Tatum. Put him on the Tatum, and that's what got Tatum going in this game for 2 of his makes. He went 4 and 9 in this game. So he ends up settling at about 42% in this series. Not great shooting lines all around. Porzingis finished at 38 without the final game appearance for him. Drew Holiday was a little better in Game 5. I think he finished 3 for 5 in that one after a low 30 percentage from the field start to the series himself. The only guy that drove them through this series, if there was a first-round MVP, it would obviously be Derek White, who was incredible again in Game 5, looking like a guy that they're going to have to involve at a high level going forward into round 2 without Porzingis here. So the defense was great. They hold Miami to 100 per 100, which is about as good as you can do. Probably one of the best marks in the playoffs so far. But the offense left a ton to be desired, and I'm glad toward the end of the series you started seeing them integrate a little bit of pace, early entries, attacking mismatches in transition, and putting the ball in the point guard's hands. It didn't go as well for Holiday in that sense, but the offense was awesome when White took it up, and even Jaylen took it up to keep the pace going.
Yeah, definitely. And to me, that's encouraging, the fact that you had people play below their offensive ceiling, certainly like significantly below it for some of those guys. Like you mentioned, Jason Tatum, Drew Holiday, Jaylen Brown, none of them had great offensive series at all. And so to still come away with 4 blowouts in 5 games against one of the best defensive teams in the league, I thought was really encouraging. Certainly, I think at times they got bogged down, and you saw some of the things that we've seen from Celtics Miami series over the years. And regardless of who they face next, and I know we're going to talk more about that, but they're going to play plenty of other good defenses, hopefully, in this playoff run. And so there are things that need to be worked out. But I also do think some of it was just missing shots, like Drew Holiday missing bunnies, Jason Tatum missing threes. Like they didn't have a great shooting series, and even so, were very dominant. And I think we could be talking about a Celtics team that was on fire in the first round and was winning these games. And then you can say, well, how reliable is that, right? Are they going to be able to keep up this hot shooting? So I think it's almost a good sign that they were able to come away with such dominant outcomes despite the fact that the offense really wasn't at its best.
I'll give Tatum some leeway, too, because he clearly struggled with seeing 2-3 defenders in front of him at times. They played him the pass, and he limited his turnovers in this series, rebounded at a high level. I think he had 12 in Game 5, and got to the free throw line a ton, hit 80% of them. I think across the board he did his job, and love the commentary from him after Game 5. I know we talked about it last night, admitting that they relaxed a little bit in that first round series against the Hawks, and that hurt them. Agreeing with us from our first episode here that the Heat were who he wanted and who the Celtics should have wanted to be alert going in. and they maintained that even without Butler available on the other side and Rozier never coming back. So that was awesome.
Yeah.
And then talking about the team's toughness and criticizing those who think you can just out-tough the Celtics easily, people who get credit for being tough because of their demonstrativeness and loudness on the floor. And the part he snuck in at the end there that I love the most is that he views tough as doing your job and showing up and doing what it takes to win. And that's something that I think he's done all season, despite not putting up the best scoring numbers or the best shooting numbers of his career, and certainly not factoring much into the MVP race by the end of it here. He did what it took to win. And if that's toughness, especially getting in on the boards, defending at a higher level at times, and certainly passing the ball and making those reads when your shot's not there or shots aren't available for you. I mean, he took 9 shots in Game 5, and it was a great game from him. So at times, I didn't love his approach in this series. I didn't love his efficiency in this series. But for him to realize what happened last year, respond to the Heat's antics the way he did, and overall have a solid series, I felt like, that he wrapped up in 5 with many of his efforts. I love what Tatum did here, and it was a great way to cap it for him.
Yeah, and honestly, a lot of it has to do with gravity. And I actually saw Richard White, Derek's dad, tweet about this morning, about how it's easy to say Derek White had a great series, and he obviously did, and he shot lights out. But I think sometimes people don't take into account like what enabled him to get those looks. And to look at Jason Tatum's stats at all in this first round as a reflection of himself is tough, because obviously the team succeeded at a very high level. And, if he's taking Bam out of the action, or if he's taking 2 guys out of the action, like, it doesn't really matter what he does from that point forward. Like, this is a roster that doesn't require him to go out there and score 30. And it might at some point, and certain schemes might require that. But I thought that he did his job, right? Like you said, he cut down on the turnovers. He was effective kind of across the board. Did a good, he had just solid performances. And so ultimately, like, he was comfortable with Derek White taking 12 more shots than him in Game 4, and an important Game 4, right? Like, those are the things that stand out to me, rather than feeling like, he has to get his, or, he ended up being the 3rd leading scorer on the team for that first round. And so they won 4-1 and had the best net rating of any team in the first round of the playoffs. And so that's a win, right? You don't really need to care about the stats. And I think that's a sign of his maturity as well.
Yeah, and it might be a strength for them to have a guy like White shooting and looking for his shot as aggressively as he did, Brown doing that, and Tatum being a little bit of a diversion in some sense, especially against a defense that's going to show as many looks as the Heat did and try to take him out of the game if that's going to be their approach. Did they prove something here? Probably not, just because we got to be real about the competition on the other side. It wasn't there, and I thought they could muck it up and catch the Celtics sleeping a little bit and push this to 6. It didn't happen, and they were so debilitated by the end. Wright missed a game, I think Game 4. Jaquez misses Game 5. You have no chance at that point. So I think we can wrap the series there. There's not too much more to say about that, and it's on to round 2, where it's going to be the Cavs or the Magic. As we record this, they're going to play a Game 6 on Friday. And so if the Cavs win, Game 1 of Cavs-Celtics will be Sunday here in Boston. If they go to a Game 7 on Sunday between those two teams in Cleveland, the winner of that will move on to play the Celtics on Tuesday at TD Garden. And it's an interesting pair of teams to talk about here, Noah, because I feel like they're almost the same team. You have a star, a great scoring star who can do a ton with the ball in their hands, and Paolo Banchero and Donovan Mitchell. You have secondary defenders and big men and good depth throughout their starting lineups, I feel like. But the biggest similarity between these two teams is that they're defensive teams, probably 2 of the 3 or 4 best defenses in the playoffs period here, and great defensive coaches as well on the other side. So the Magic have carried forward their unbelievable defensive season into the playoffs. They're holding the Cavs to, I think, 98 offensive rating in this series. And the Cavs are doing their thing to some degree, too. Great clutch finish from Mitchell and Mobley. Mobley with the winning dunk and a big block down the stretch of that game as well. They clinched Game 5, and it looked like the Magic were going to take Game 5. I had the Magic in the series because I thought the Cavs were just beat up and inconsistent, and you're seeing the offensive numbers from them. They're not threatening. But now they're in a position to meet the Celtics in round 2, and we can start with them. They've played the Celtics well over the last 2 years here. You have 2 wins for the Celtics at TD Garden, but that 22-point comeback on Cleveland still looms from the regular season there. So how do you feel about them? Would they be your preference, or are you looking at the Magic?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I think you summed it up well. They're pretty similarly constructed rosters. A lot of it comes down to, is Donovan Mitchell going to have a 45-point game? Right now, he's struggling a little bit. He's been banged up. I don't think that's really where he's at, as far as, the likelihood that he's going to steal one or steal a few from the Celtics single-handedly. The one advantage, I will say, Cleveland has more experience. Like, the Magic, this is literally their first time here, and so I don't know that they have a real push to make the conference finals in them. Like, this is a good team. They're going to have a good offseason regardless. They made the playoffs. Maybe they get the first round. But I don't think they can really make a push with so much inexperience on this roster, regardless of whether Porzingis is out, regardless of the fact that over the last few years, their size has bothered the Celtics. I think ultimately they don't have a great chance against Boston. I don't think Cleveland does either, to be honest. Neither of these, I thought I had Miami being a more difficult matchup than either of these teams. And I think a lot of people...
I don't think that's going to hold true now, though, given what the Heat had. It was
I
definitely going to be true if the Heat had more in their arsenal in round one, but with where they ended that series health-wise, round two is definitely going to be more difficult.
Yeah, I guess where things landed, it was pretty brutal. But
I think either of these teams could take Boston 6.
Yeah, I had Heat in 6 too, but I think, ultimately it's not going to be a huge differentiator. One thing I will say is Tatum talked, like you referenced earlier, Tatum talked about how he wanted to play Miami because he didn't want to overlook the first round opponent, which I thought it was pretty cool that he admitted that, because we always speculate those types of things. I do wonder if there's an element of like getting Miami done, if there's an element of now thinking, okay, we kind of have an easy second round here, because I think that's the dominant narrative around Cleveland and Orlando, that both of these teams are not the most formidable second round opponents compared to what we have out west and compared to other potential second round matchups that could have been the Knicks, the Bucks, teams that all year long seemed a little bit more daunting. And so I don't think they're going to overlook them, but I would say that's like the one thing that maybe a little bit concerns me, is them feeling like, okay, we did the Heat, we got them in 5. I think this should be a sweeper, a 5-game series, honestly.
Round two?
Yeah.
Well, it's worth noting the Cavs are missing Dean Wade, who was so great in that last game. Mitchell playing injured to some degree here, obviously, with ailments from the regular season carrying over, specifically the knee. He's shooting pretty poorly from the field and from 3 in this series so far. Garland's shaky season, up and down year, has carried over too, despite some good three-point shooting in this series, and their role guys haven't provided any three-point shooting. And they have non-shooting bigs, and Jared Allen's injured as well. We'll see what his health status is going into Game 6. He didn't practice today as we record this, so it's going to be interesting with them, too, just how healthy are they going into the round 2, because if they're not themselves physically, that's when you start to look at the Magic a little bit as a bigger threat. Now, on paper, with both of these teams, I don't think there's any way the Magic can beat the Celtics. I do think there's a path for the Cavs to do it. It'd probably have to involve the Celtics being so shaken up by Porzingis' loss and overlooking them and losing a couple games in crunch time. So it's still unlikely, but you have guys on that Cleveland side that can steal games in a close game late, and that's how they've basically beaten the Celtics in recent years. The Grant game, that overtime finish where Tatum tied the game going into overtime, some of those great games these teams have played, they've been decided at the end. So I just think the Cavs can play close and win a game late, win 2 games, maybe win 3, and I don't think they could beat the Celtics, but there's a path for them. Whereas Orlando, it'd be similar to the Heat, I feel like. You might slip up once, you might slip up twice, but I don't think there's any real threat of Orlando actually winning that series. So that's a differentiator to me.
Yeah, I'm curious. I like following like the defensive battles here, and I'm curious if you throw Jonathan Isaac on like a Jason Tatum for the entire series. I feel like we haven't seen him healthy enough to know what he's capable of, but his defensive numbers are like some of the best in the league, and he's bothered, literally anybody that he's matched up against this year. So I think they're good. I like the fact that both teams are good defensive teams, because I think it forces the Celtics offense to stay sharp, and we know that the Celtics offense can just take off against subpar defenses. Like, they will just hit a million threes and play with ease. And regardless, I think if you're looking for a full playoff run, which every round that we're evaluating here, we're thinking in the long term of a finals run. And I think both of those matchups force you to stay sharp offensively, the same way that the Heat did. And then you have maybe the Knicks, maybe the Bucks, and in the conference finals. Maybe that's jumping the gun, but I like them both for their own unique reasons.
Yeah, the Magic one, if you're picking who do you want to play, I think that one's easy because you're probably going to beat them. It's probably not going to go super long, but you are going to face that defensive test. Probably the best defensive test you'll see the entire playoffs when you think about Isaac, when you think about Jalen Suggs, who could probably give Brown some issues on the switchability and size they have inside. I don't think they saw Carter much during the regular season, who's back now, and you remember that game, they just smoked the Celtics down in Orlando on the in-season tournament game there. So there's a physicality, there's an offensive rebounding component that you have to deal with if you're the Celtics there too. That would be a frustrating series, a challenging series physically. But man, their offense, it's brutal. They don't have the creation in the backcourt. Paolo's awesome, but he can be inefficient, and he's not the greatest three-point shooter right now. So that one would be fun to me, just because you get to see this young team. I love the Tatum Paolo thing, like their friendship. They're going to have a back and forth there. And I just like the idea of going down to Orlando a little bit too, so I'll throw that in there. I don't know what to expect from Cleveland. Maybe it'll surprise me. So I want to see Orlando. The problem is Cavs, just, again, from the prospect that they can actually push you to the brink, would probably be a better story, a more entertaining series. Definitely more star power in that series in a conventional sense.
Yeah. I mean, you have Donovan Mitchell, which I feel like he's just been like a playoff star for years now. Whereas Orlando, you have guys that have never been there before. But again, I think they both kind of present their own challenges, and I guess I would lean Orlando too, and from a sense of it's probably a little bit of an easier matchup. But I don't think that Cleveland just hasn't been good these past few months. They got a lot of flack for tanking towards the end of the season there because they didn't want to face, either Miami or Philadelphia. And I think that a little bit captures like what these last few months have looked like for
some
that
real
team.
Frustration from their fans toward the coaching too.
Yeah, and I don't want to say that they're soft. Like I feel like those are dumb allegations, or like that's not the way I like to characterize teams. But like that Cleveland team against New York in the first round, like that's not a team that really feels like they have an upset in them.
And they have a vulnerability in those guards that you can attack too. The Magic don't really have that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell backcourt is, I think the Celtics guards are going to look at that as an opportunity for sure.
Yeah, and it's close. They're both great defensive teams. There's pros and cons on both sides. I almost think you look at them equally and say it's not all that different. I just think the Cavs have a path to actually winning a series, like I've said, and the Magic don't. So that's the real differentiator there for me. We, of course, are brought to you by PrizePicks. Check out PrizePicks throughout this playoff run, whether it is the Magic or the Cavs. They're going to have all their predictions on these guys' stats. It could be points, could be rebounds, assists. I love to just go in the app there and see what they're predicting these guys to put up on any given night. A lot of times with Tatum, it's high 20s. We've had some luck going less on that. And then some low ones for Al Horford, who's now a starter. They've bumped him up a little bit since he's moved to the starting lineup. Derek White's been a great guy to pick more on. So it's our official daily fantasy sports partner. You just pick two guys, as many as 6 in any sport. You can cross sports too, and you're off. Daily fantasy. Again, you can get 100% deposit match up to $100 when you go to prizepicks.com/CLNS. Just check out the app. Use that code when you start. It'll help us here at the Garden Report as well as CLNS Media. And again, it's prizepicks.com/CLNS. Just pick more, pick less. It's that easy. PrizePicks, again, our official daily fantasy sports partner here. And check out the Game Time app as well. I'll tell you a little bit more about that after our final conversation here. But it's a great experience. Download the app. And if you use our code, you're going to get $20 off your first purchase over there. Terms apply. But again, check out the Game Time app. And use our code here, CLNS, for $20 off your first purchase. And I'll tell you more about that after we talk about Kristaps Porzingis here, who's probably going to miss this second round series. I'm going to miss at least a week here before he's evaluated. I think it's going to be longer than that, according to just all the history of the soleus strain, which we know it now is. And them having to be cautious with him to some degree too here, given that he's probably been dealing with this for a little bit. Our guy Cam over at Celtics Lab, I think, had a good point that he had some protection on that too going in. So it might have been something that they were managing that got aggravated in that Game 4 against the Heat. And it's a killer. But you look at their 22-4 record without him this year. You look at the early returns, and again, debilitated Heat team on the other side, so take it with a grain of salt. I love the pace they played with. I loved Horford's impact in this game. Luke Kornet I thought was great, which I'll throw in on the end there just to make that point. And I think it allowed the guards to get more involved as screeners too, and that freed up White. It gave Holiday some opportunities to succeed. So you don't like the depth it takes away from you. You don't like the post-up threat that Porzingis is being out of the lineup, and certainly there's a size playing the drop that he brings that I think would work well against these two teams here if he was out there. But there's a different style they're playing with now, and I don't know if it's better, but offensively, they just seem to flow more in Game 5. And if they're going to be passing 3-4 times possession, if they're going to be involving the guards at the level they did in Game 5, I might prefer the way they're playing offense other than just Tatum and Porzingis going into that pick and roll and throw it against a mismatch and try to get, still a tough guard on the Orlando side if it's that matchup into the play and maybe slowing them down a little bit, dragging down their offense. I think that happened in this Heat series at times, and Porzingis was shooting 38% by the end of it. So I think you look at the early returns without him and say they could play at least better offense without him, as long as Horford's shooting well, which is a key.
I don't know that I'd say that they're going to play better offense without him. I mean, it was at the end of the day, it was one game, and they were also playing better in Game 4 as well. But and I guess he was lost pretty early in that game. But I do think that they have a luxury of talent on this team. They have just so much talent and so many scoring options that I noticed throughout the year, and I wish I had the numbers exactly, but it sometimes feels like whenever they were down a starter, whether it was Tatum, whether it was Brown, whether it was Porzingis, they played better. And I think it was just this feeling of there was a little bit more shots to go around and they played free, and there was this, it almost is a little bit crowded when all five of those guys are there. I do think at their best, all five of those guys are there and they're healthy and they're playing well, and that's their best bet to play against a team like the Nuggets. But we're talking about the Magic, we're talking about the Cavs. You take Porzingis out, you still have a much better Celtics team. And so it's really not, to me, it's not a concern at all in the short term. What is a concern is the fact that this is the kind of injury that you really can't play through. You can't play through it if it's not fully healed. We've seen it in the past. Everybody talks about Kevin Durant's calf injury in the finals. I think there's this understanding that this is not one of those things that you risk, and that's why Giannis is missing the game tonight. It's the risk is too high with all the Achilles factors and things like that. I will say Al Horford being the guy that can step in and be in the starting lineup, the way that he's a connector on offense, I think it's so underrated because he doesn't get assist numbers for it, because so many times it's the hockey assist.
And he pushes the pace in the full court, too.
And so it does give them a little bit of that dynamic that I think you're referencing of it almost makes their offense seem more dynamic at points, even though he's more limited in what he can do. And so there's advantages to both. I do think they got Porzingis for a reason, and at their best, Porzingis is on the court. But it's not like you have a regular team that you're missing your starting center and you have to bring a backup. Al is not a backup really. He's a starting center in this league, and he would be right now if it wasn't for this acquisition. And so they're in a good spot, and I think their roster was built around the understanding that Porzingis is a high risk of injury player, and that's why they kept both guys. That's why they have Xavier Tillman as a backup. It's why they've invested in their 15th roster spot being a big. I think this is not a shock that this happened. It's unfortunate and it sucks and it easily could have not happened, but they have everything in place to be able to be okay right now.
Yeah, and John made that point too. They've played better with everybody out of the lineup this year.
Yeah.
Horford has sat those back-to-backs, and they've succeeded in those spots. And Brown, I think they're undefeated with out this year when he sits. So all of the individual parts of that top six they've been able to sustain losing. I think the guys who probably feel the most would be White, who some of their worst losses of the year came without. The Charlotte one pops into my mind immediately, and Tatum, who they did win without, but it was against the Wizards of the world when they would selectively sit him late in the year. So they can afford to lose Porzingis. They can probably afford to lose Brown for a game if that had to happen. And Holiday, he's been so pivotal to defensive structure. That one might actually hurt them a little bit more than either of those guys. So you can get by without Porzingis clearly here, and I think you can actually play better. And it was interesting during the year, they had a better offensive rating by 0.7 without him on the floor. The defensive rating stayed the same. So you didn't lose anything from him during the regular season. And now that you have 22-4, it's a heavy sample size of them being just a little bit better without him. And are they actually better in a playoff situation where you're tapping in the depth more? Does that record go down? I think it certainly will, and that probably leads to a longer series here with Cleveland or Orlando while he's out. But for now, based on what we have, and they played some good teams, Phoenix, Philly with Embiid. I'm thinking of like a Golden State blowout win too.
Yeah.
They didn't have him there for. There was a bunch of games throughout the sample we're talking about here. Even Dallas on the road, they won all those games without Porzingis this year.
He missed a lot of games.
Yeah.
Like when I saw that he missed 25 games, I mean, that's a pretty substantial sample size.
Now
And
here's
so,
the difference. A lot of them were rests. So you either had Horford
oh yeah,
like fully loaded off the back-to-back, or there was a lot of space between the games. So the depth wasn't hurt as much or relied upon. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, it's going to be every
Yeah.
other day now where you have to
mostly.
lean on
I mean,
Horford
this
for
first round is
35,
kind of
38.
wonky. Like, there's a possibility of some rest days there as well. And we know
Yeah.
that Horford's much better when he has more time to rest. Like, the numbers are pretty clear there. when
Every
he
other
has-
day hurts Horford when she
It does, yeah. But, and I'll segue this so you don't have to, but I think Luke Kornet is like a very sizable backup big right now. And so, I mean, the defense that he played on Bam yesterday, and I hope this is not too hot of a take, but I mean, that was the best defense that Bam has faced this series. Like, he was really bothering him. And all year we've seen Luke play really well, and he's super familiar with the system.
Luke's good.
Yeah, he's gotten a lot better offensively. Like, he has a great touch around the rim now, especially compared to a few years ago.
He's strong, too. I was telling Ahmed. He just looks stronger in his upper body.
Yeah, and so I'm not worried about him having to play more minutes, and I almost feel, again, the injury sucks. You wish it didn't happen, and you wish you could have avoided it. But this is a Celtics team that I think was ready to go from an injury standpoint. Like, think about how many awesome wins we saw this year that were, like, led by Peyton Pritchard, Sam Hauser, and Luke Kornet. And so, to me, it's only right now that those guys have an opportunity to step up and play extra minutes that maybe they wouldn't have. Like, this is the story of this 2024 Celtics basketball team. It's guys like Luke. So it wouldn't have felt right to me that he now is not a part of this playoff run because they never needed him, really, which could have been the case.
So that's the one thing I think that's inconclusive coming out of this first round is, will the bench impact carry over to the playoffs? You had that amazing game one, and Luke, of course, missed the first half of the series, essentially. Hauser probably had 2 good games and 2 not as good games. And then I don't really even remember the bench's impact in Game 5 other than the Luke stuff there.
Hauser had 17 last night.
Did he? All right. So
6 of 10.
You had a mixed bag throughout the series where some guys were going some nights, other guys weren't. You, of course, had that night where Pritchard didn't even get a shot off, which was kind of weird.
Yeah.
So I do think the thing is, as long as one guy's there and another guy's not playing bad, I think that's enough from the bench unit. But now that Porzingis is out, you are asking a little bit more in terms of scoring from that group. So if I wish I had the number in front of me, but I feel like the Heat's bench scored more in this series than the Celtics. Or at least they drew even.
But here's the thing, though. The Celtics bench, their story all year has not been that they're a high-scoring bench unit. Like, they're not.
They're a plus-minus
But they're a plus,
group.
exactly. They're a plus-minus bench unit. And Sam Hauser has the best plus-minus of any player in the NBA right now for the first round. I saw that today. I think Sean Grandy shared that. So, to me, it's hard to look at the box score and evaluate the bench's impact. I thought the bench was very impactful in the series. Like, there was not a drop-off when they went in. Peyton Pritchard had a huge Game 3 from an energy standpoint. I think last night Sam Hauser was big, and they didn't really need it. They were in control of that one. Game 1, obviously, the bench was great. Game 2, everybody struggled, and I think the bench was a part of that. But overall, I mean, you didn't see much different than what you saw during the regular season. And I know we hear this a lot. Joe has been really stressing this point that the regular season is the same as the playoffs. I know not everybody feels that way. Jaylen Brown was very quick to rebut that.
I can't stand when he says that, and he keeps saying it over and over
I know
again.
it's one of his lines now. It's like the margins and the playoffs.
He said nothing changes without Porzingis. I was like, really?
Well, actually, if you're referring to the quote that I remember, I think
Game 4, yeah.
Yeah, I think what he meant by that is like nothing changes from their mindset.
Mentality.
It doesn't mean that like other guys need to step up. Like Jaylen said that last night in the locker room as well, right? That he's, it's not that him and Jason Tatum need to do more.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's just in some rosters, one of your leading scorers goes down, and obviously a lot of things change. Different guys are going to have to now be focal points of the offense that weren't before. And so I do think that's a truthful statement in a sense that nothing changes in a lot of ways. Obviously, schematically, things change, and it's more about, is Al Horford going to be able to, he has a much bigger responsibility now. And I was watching him.
Minutes.
Yeah, I was watching him run around yesterday, and I was like, don't get hurt. Like watching him going around picks, like when Bam shoved him on the opening play. Whereas you know, a lot of times during the season, it's like, okay, if Al needed to miss a few games, which it seems like he literally never needs to, knock on wood.
He never needs to.
Yeah, but you know, now he needs to stay healthy and he needs to stay fresh because they really need him now. So there's a little bit less of a margin of, you know, minor injuries too.
I trust the health with him. The freshness is what you're looking at, especially when there's only one game and some travel between games here. We'll figure out which city the Celtics are potentially traveling to round 2 with Game 6 taking place on Friday. Cavs Magic from Orlando. If the Cavs win, we'll probably have a quick preview show coming over the weekend ahead of Game 1, which would take place on Sunday afternoon at TD Garden. So keep track of that series. Keep subscribed to here on Celtics All Access and CLNS Media for when we go live to preview that series. Of course, show some love to our newest sponsor, Game Time. Just download the Game Time app. You're going to get plenty of ticket offers right up to and even after Game Time actually starts. You could have gotten into TD Garden for Game 5 for just $103, and that's the deals you're finding all the time on Game Time. And again, you're going to get $20 off your first purchase over there when you use our code CLNS. Game Time, official ticket partner here at CLNS Media and the Garden Report. Of course, terms apply. Check out the Game Time app. Download it today. Of course, I got my PXG on. Show them some love over at pxg.com/Garden Report. Perfect time of year to break it out. It was 70 today, so I had to do it. And it felt great to be out there on the course. You're free, you're swinging. It's just a lot of great apparel over there, so I've enjoyed wearing them.
I just noticed you have the hat and the shirt.
It all goes together, and they got a lot of great colors and styles, so check them out over there, pxg.com/Garden Report. She's Noa Dalzell. Lots of writing coming between these games and practices to come as well. We'll have more from practice tomorrow as we record this. Celtics preparing for round 2, trying to fix some of the offensive things that came up during the first round. It wasn't the smoothest series on that end, but I'd expect it to continue to be a challenge on that side of the ball, given the teams they might go up against into round 2. We'll have a more specific preview of whoever that is coming up, as I mentioned. And, of course, subscribe to all of our channels here, and we'll be back in studio again next week, midway through this series, to get a first impression of it. But for now, this has been an in-studio edition of the Garden Report. Hey, Bobby Manning here. If you made it this far, you probably enjoyed our video, so subscribe to our channel for all content. Hit the bell for notifications, and subscribe to all of our social media platforms at Celtics CLNS.